everyone, I am Krisa. So today I will be discussing about the different definition of self according to 8 philosophers. Let's proceed to the first one. The first philosopher is Socrates. So Socrates is one of the famous Greek philosopher. He was a scholar and a teacher. He was also considered as the father of Western philosophy. So, if you don't know, Socrates is the teacher of Plato, and Plato is a teacher of Aristotle. According to Socrates, every man is dualistic. It means that every one of us is composed of two important aspects of a personhood, which is the body and soul. Wherein the body is imperfect and impermanent, which means that our body have flaws. We're not perfect, and our body is impermanent because we have our own limit. Our body has a limitation, which means that our body, are not eternal. Hindi tayo walang forever sa body natin. On the other hand is the soul. It is the opposite of the body. So, soul is perfect and permanent. That is why, according to Socrates, there is a dichotomous realms, which are the physical realm and ideal realm. So, in physical realm, it is changeable, transient, and imperfect. That is why we can say that our body is belong here. Kasi, ayun nga, ang body natin ay nagbabago. Hindi perpekto at hindi permanente. So, if we die, our body will go to the physical realm. And also to the physical world that we are living in. And also the things that we saw, smell, feel, and so on. All of that belongs to the physical realm. On the other hand is the ideal realm. It is unchanging, eternal, and perfect. On these realms includes the intellectual essences of the universe, concepts such as truth, goodness, and beauty. And from the given definition, we can say that our soul is belong here, which is the key concept to better understand Socrates' state of the self. So, what is meant by Socrates about the self? Actually, Socrates doesn't said the certain definition of soul, but according to scholars, ang ibig sabihin daw ni Socrates sa soul ay thinking and willing subject. So, with that being said, we can assume that the soul is the intellectual and moral personality of a human person. So, that is why for Socrates, the soul is the seat of knowledge and ignorance of goodness and badness. That is why for Socrates, to think and will, which is basically the soul, is the essence of human person. So, in other words, the soul is the person's true self. And now that we already knew that the soul or the self is the essence of the human person, Socrates said that we have to take care of our souls. That is why it is important to take care of our souls, because according to Socrates, we need to attain the good life. Because if we see all the main goal of the philosophy of Socrates, that is to attain the good life. And for him, for us to be able to attain the good life, we need to become wise and virtuous. This explains Socrates said that good life is attained through acquisition of knowledge, wisdom, and virtue. It means that we really need to exert our efforts, our times, and energy for us to take care of our souls. And we can now insert the famous statement of Socrates that an unexamined life is not worth living. That's true because if we do not examine our life, it is difficult for us to lead our life. It is hard for us to attain the good life. So let's have an example. For instance, it will be hard for us to know the course that we like if we did not give our time, our efforts to know what are my strengths, what are my skills, what are my abilities. That is why it is good that we know, we examine, we assess ourselves, because if we know those things, it will become easy for us to know of what is the next step that we have to do. At alam nyo ba na yung context na pinagmulan ng famous statement ni Socrates is derived from the context to know is to know oneself. According also to Socrates, ang knowledge daw ay naging kakambal na ng virtue. And the virtue is intrinsic. It means it is already present to our will. And according to him, because of our virtue, we are able to know and to discover the truth. And once a person discovers the truth, malaman na niya, makakapag-isip na siya ng mga bagay na what is the right thing to do based on the truth that being discovered. So, that is what meant by the Socratic dictum that knowing what is right is doing what is right. At yun lang naman ang naging perspective ni Socrates about the self. Next, let's talk about the philosophical perspective of Plato about the self. Well, Plato is one of the famous philosophers in the 5th century BCE. And what I've said in my last discussion about Socrates, he was the student of Socrates and was the teacher of Aristotle. He was also one of the founders of Western philosophy. And Plato believes that the self is immortal in a mortal perishable body, which means that the self is immortal because it is associated with the soul, which he believes to be eternal and unchanging, while the moral and perishable body is a merely temporary vessel or the shell of the soul during a person's earthly life. Actually, if we will look back into my discussion about the philosophical perspective of Socrates about the self, we will notice the similarity of Socrates and Plato have regarding the concept of the self. They both agreed that the soul is the self. Ang pinagkaiba lang kay Plato ay ang tripartite soul. It means, according to Plato, there are 3 parts of the soul, which are the rational, the spirited, and the appetitive soul. So, what is the difference of these 3? For Plato, the rational soul is located into our head, and it enables us to think, reflect, analyze, and other cognitive functions. Kumbaga, nandito yung reasoning and intellect of a person. And he also actually contends that the rational soul is the highest form of cognition, and that leads us that the rational soul desires reason. On the other hand is the spirited soul. It is located to our chest, parang sa ating puso. It enables us to experience joy, happiness, sadness, anger, or any other emotional feelings. And the desire of spirit stemmed from the belief about honor. And lastly is the appetitive soul, which is located into our abdomen or sa ating tiyan. It enables us to experience physical pain, hunger, thirst, and other physical wants. So basically, this desires for pleasure. In this tree, ang pinaka-superior daw ay ang rational soul because this acts as the moral and rational guidepost of the two. So, That is the perspective of Plato about the self. Next is Aristotle. Aristotle is an ancient Greek philosopher. He was the most brilliant student of Plato. Yet, Aristotle diverged from most of Plato's fundamental philosophies, especially on the concept of the self. As we may already know, Plato is sure that the true self is the soul, not the body. And to be specific, self for Plato is the rational soul, and which is separable from the body. And Aristotle's concept of the self is quietly opposite. For Aristotle, self is composed of body and soul, mind and matter, sense and intellect, and passion and reason. And reason is the most supreme because it will lead you to happiness. It is the way we attain happiness. When reason rules over the senses, mind over matter, the person tends to live a happy life. And Aristotle put emphasis on reason. However, unlike Socrates and Plato, he does not neglect the development of the whole self. Furthermore, for Aristotle, perfection and happiness comes from wisdom and virtue, wherein wisdom is the true knowledge and virtue is doing what is best for you, which leads you to the attainment of your own perfection and happiness. Aristotle likewise thought the theory of the golden mean. And the golden mean means moderation. And if we say moderation, dapat sakto lang or balance lang. Hindi lumalabis at hindi kulang. Aristotle believed that moderation is the key to virtuous life or virtuous living. Virtuous living, according to Aristotle, involves finding the right balance in one's action and emotions, avoiding extremes, and acting with reason and rationality. So that's it for the perspective of Aristotle about the self. Next is René Descartes. René Descartes is a French philosopher, scientist, and mathematician. And his famous philosophical statement is, "I think, therefore I am," or "I doubt, therefore I am." For him, the act of thinking about the self, of being self-conscious, is in itself proof that there is a self. Just a context kung saan nanggaling ang theory ni Descartes about the self is kasi parang meron siyang point sa buhay niya na sa pag-philosophize niya, inisip niya, what if lahat ng mga bagay illusion lang? Just like he assumed that parang idadoubt niya lahat. For Descartes, the essence of the self is a thinking entity that doubts, understands, analyzes, questions, and reasons. So, the mind was the one who thinks, and the body was unextended or a non-thinking thing. So, there are two dimensions of the self, which is the self as a thinking entity and the self as a physical body. So, the thinking self or the soul is the non-material, immortal, conscious being and independent of as a physical laws of the universe. While the physical body is the material, mortal, non-thinking entity that fully governed by the physical laws of nature. And that is the philosophical perspective of Descartes about the self. So, Gilbert Ryle was a British philosopher. He was a former professor, and he was best known and often identified with his work about the concept of mind. I act, therefore I am. This is the most or the best phrase that created by Gilbert Ryle. This belief debunks René Descartes' idea, I think, therefore I am. In Descartes' statement, he is a firm believer of the separation or distinction of the mind and the body, which Gilbert Ryle disagrees because he thinks that mental processes are intelligent acts. He believes that the mind and body are the same. He believes that actions determine the concept of self. He believes that how you act or what your actions are depicts what you are or what your self is and who you are as a person. An example to such philosophical stand is that when you think or you perceive yourself that you are a respectful person, it does not guarantee that you are a truly one respectful person. Rather, your actions that will define you and your actions will determine whether you are a truly decent or a respectful person or not. Paul Churchland. Paul Churchland is a Canadian philosopher and author. He was known for his studies of brain, philosophy of minds, and neurophilosophy. Churchland adheres to materialism, the belief that nothing exists. If a thing can be recognized by our senses, then it is not real. Churchland asserts that since the mind can't be experienced by our senses, then the mind doesn't exist. It is the physical brain and not the mind that gives us our sense of self. So according to Churchland, the self is the brain. All we have is the brain, and so if the brain is gone, then there is no self. Overall, eliminative materialism means that the self is the brain. So that's all for Paul Churchland. Next is George Herbert Mead. George Herbert Mead is an American sociologist. He is considered as the father of American pragmatism and one of the pioneers in the field of social psychology because of his contribution on the development of the person relating to various social factors. According to Mead, the self is not there at birth, or the self is not exist at birth. So for him, the self is developed over time from social experiences and activities. On our next topic, Charles Horton Cooley called it the looking glass self. And the looking glass is a mirror. So people are mirrors to us. So I may not see myself, but someone else has seen me, and sometimes they call out things that they see in me. So self, according to Mead, has two parts, which is the I and me. And we understand ourselves from the two perspectives. The first part of the self is the I, which is the I is subjective and it is how you see yourself. But there's also a side of us that comes from our interactions with others, which is the me. The me is how others see you. Others who know you, like your parents, your siblings, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your friends, they have an image of you too. So they can describe what else they see in you. And sometimes we don't accept how others see us. They might say, "You have a really bad temper." "No, I don't." "Yes, you do." "What? I don't see." You don't see that part of you, but they see you because, again, we don't always see ourselves. And sometimes we're oblivious to who we are, but other people around us see us too. So again, the I is how you see yourself, and it is subjective. And the me is objective. This is where you're an object to yourself, and this is how other people see in you. And that is the perspective of Mead about the self. The last one is Charles Horton Cooley. Charles Horton Cooley is an American sociologist who employed a socio-psychological approach to the understanding of society. Cooley was best known for his concept, the looking glass self. The looking glass theory was first described by Cooley in the year 1902. According to Cooley, there are 3 steps in the formation of the looking glass self. The first one is we imagine how we appear to others. So we imagine we come across to others by observing their actions, body language, and verbal cues. So for example, if someone smiles and nods while we speak, we may interpret it as a positive response. The second one is how others judge our appearance. So we may interpret the reactions of others based on our own understanding and beliefs. For instance, if someone looks bored while we speak, we may assume that they find us uninteresting. The third one is we develop feelings about the responses to this judgment. So based on our interpretations of others' reactions, we develop our self-concept. To better understand this concept of self, which is the looking glass self, is that our sense of self is influenced by others' view of us. And that's all with my discussion about the 8 philosophers and their philosophical perspective about the self.